Slitterhead is a game that I've been looking forward to for a few months now, though I've intentionally ignored pretty much everything about it. I didn't watch any trailers, I didn't watch any of the gameplay. I wanted to go into this game as blind as possible, which is what I like to do with most games that I'm actually looking forward to. But the reason why I was hyped for this game, despite not really knowing anything about it, is because of the one piece of information that I did know. And that's that Slitterhead is directed by the dude who directed and wrote the original Silent Hill game and the original Siren game. Two absolute classics of the survival horror genre, and if you know me, you know survival horror is my favorite genre of gaming ever. But despite the fact my blind expectations were high, I still went in level-headed because yes, Slitterhead has an iconic name attached to it when it comes to the survival horror genre, but still, I knew this game wasn't going to be AAA. I wasn't expecting it to be on a large scale or be polished in a technical sense like the recent Resident Evil games and the Silent Hill 2 remake or Alan Wake 2 or anything like that. So yeah, I was just more or less hoping that this game would be a hidden gem. That's all I was really hoping for. But anyway, Slitterhead finally came out today and I've been spending a lot of time with it, which means I have a lot of thoughts that I want to share with you guys. So I'm going to jump into the review. I'm going to show you guys some raw gameplay, but before I do that, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. If you're new here, I talk about video games all the time. Day one reviews just like this, other video game discussions. And any game that's in the realm of horror gets special treatment on this channel. But enough with this introduction, let's talk about Slitterhead. So before we get into my thoughts on Slitterhead, I want to make it clear that this is a first impressions review. I feel like I got a good grasp of the game already, but still, I haven't beaten it at the time of recording this, so just keep that in mind. And I'm going to keep this review as spoiler-free as possible. I'll talk about the story, but I won't get into any of the specifics, and all of the gameplay that you're watching is from the very early parts of the game. But anyway, I'm going to get straight into it. I think Slitterhead, for the most part, is a damn surprising game. I'm having a lot of fun with it so far. It can be a little rough here and there. There are some gameplay choices that could have been a little better or more polished out, but overall, I think Slitterhead is insanely unique and really, really fun, especially if you're into horror games or horror adjacent games. And I actually want to talk about the story first. I don't know why, but I didn't even think of the story at all when I first started playing. I was mainly excited to just learn about the gameplay and the fighting and all the other aspects. It's like I totally forgot that games also have stories, so I was surprised as hell to find out that, in my opinion, Slitterhead has a pretty good one so far. I found myself hooked instantaneously from the opening cutscene, and the early hours of the game only got me more and more invested. Again, no spoilers, but I'm going to tell you the basic setup. You play as an entity known only as the Spirit. He has no body. He's just a floating consciousness, and he doesn't seem to have any memories of who he is, or what he is, or what his goal is, though he does start to piece those things together as the story progresses. But how you, the player, get around is that you use the Spirit's consciousness to possess any NPC that you want, and they are your vessel. You use them to move around, to talk to other NPCs, and for combat. And as you're walking around in one of your meat puppets, you start getting hunted by a Slitterhead. Slitterheads are these weird, creepy, giant-ass creatures that also possess NPC bodies. And again, when the game starts, the Spirit doesn't know what Slitterheads are or why they want to kill him, but he senses that he also wants to kill them in return, and this possessor versus possessor war isn't really anything new. That's the core setup of the story, but as it goes on, you meet more characters, not just NPCs, but actual characters that you befriend, and you learn their stories and their motivations. And like a lot of good horror-centric games, the main threat isn't necessarily the Slitterheads themselves, but a person or being even more powerful and even more dangerous. And yeah, like I said, from what I've seen so far, I'm really liking this story. story. I'm interested in the mystery. I'm invested in pretty much all of the characters. The larger story that's being built up behind the scenes also has my full attention, and I've just stayed thoroughly entertained by it. But now let's talk about the gameplay, and this is the part of the game, like most games, that's going to be the make or break for a lot of potential players. It's not a survival horror game, which came as a little bit of a surprise to myself because of who the main creative director is, but it didn't annoy me or upset me that it wasn't. I didn't feel like the game was a bait and switch or anything like that. I went in with an open mind, and what I got brought me a lot of fun, I'm not gonna lie. But again, Slitterhead is not a survival horror game, so don't expect to be collecting health kits and preserving ammo. Don't go into this game assuming that you'll be walking through creepy haunted mansions or abandoned insane asylums and referencing your map all the time. This is very much an action horror game. The combat is like a combination of a Souls game and For Honor, if you ever played that. It kind of feels Souls-like in the sense that the core combat feels like most of your standard action RPGs these days. You're going to hold up your weapon to block, you're going to use light and heavy attacks when the enemies are vulnerable, and you're going to dodge roll when they try to retaliate. And you do all this again while possessing NPC bodies, and it's a whole lot of fun because if the enemy backs you into a corner or has you close to death, you can just quickly possess a different NPC, and oftentimes the enemy will have no idea you did that, which gives you a chance to land some blows from behind. And it's a little bit like For Honor in the way that you dodge. You got to kind of predict where they're going to attack you from, up high, down low, left or right, and if you time your block just right, you get to parry them. But there's more to combat than just possessing NPCs. There's other characters in this game as well called rarities, and they are the actual characters. Like, they have names, they have some voice acting, and they are part of the story. They're the characters, they're the cast of the game, and they team up with the spirit, and you can use them in combat as well, but it's a little different than just possessing random NPCs. For one, they remain conscious while you're controlling them, so they are experiencing everything right alongside you, but they also have their own unique skills that add a whole other layer of depth to gameplay. For example, one character has these long talon-like hands, and that lets you deal massive melee damage. They can also throw out a blood web that slows down slitterheads that are trying to run away from you. And I won't get into some of the other rarities yet because I don't want to spoil anything, but each one feels a bit different, at least the ones that I've come across so far, and I like that a lot. Like, one uses guns, which is pretty cool. But on a surface level, this game doesn't have the most unique or groundbreaking gameplay, but because of all the small creative choices and how those choices bounce off of each other, it makes Slitterhead one of the most fresh feeling games I've played all year when it comes to the core moment-to-moment combat. But now let's get into some of the more negative aspects of Slitterhead, because even though I'm liking it a lot, it's far from a perfect game, and there's a decent chance most of you watching this won't be as forgiving as me when it comes to the pros outweighing the cons. But anyway, most of the issues with Slitterhead come from the fact that it's not a AAA game. It feels and plays like a AA game, and oftentimes a dated one at that. Movement feels clunky and often looks really awkward. The animations when you're fighting enemies are pretty dated as well, and I don't mean like PS4 dated. I'm talking about PS3 era animations most of the time. Another critique I have with the game is more of a personal preference thing, but I haven't played a lot of Japanese RPGs, and the ones that I have played have a core feature that I don't really like, and it's that they often take away the momentum from you at every turn to give you another cutscene. You very rarely have the time to breathe with the gameplay. It's like you get 5 minutes of gameplay followed by 10 minutes of reading dialogue, and for me, it often kills the momentum and the immersion. Again, I don't know if all JRPGs are like that. I've barely played any, again, so that's just anecdotal, but Slitterhead does the same thing, especially in the early parts of the game, and it doesn't ruin the game for me by any means. I just hope it stops doing that later on. And by the way, clarification, I'm not saying Slitterhead is a JRPG. It's not at all. I'm just saying it shares that similarity with the ones that I've personally played. Also, the level design feels very limiting most of the time. I found myself revisiting the same areas pretty often and pretty early on, and that was disappointing, but because of the setting, a dingy, run-down city, it somehow didn't completely kill the immersion for me, at least not yet, because I kept telling myself it's one of those cities where every block just looks the same. You do visit more places later on, though. The game doesn't just take place on one stretch of road, though it does feel like it at some points. I want to just take a second to show off this really cool physical edition of Slitterhead. It's the day 1 edition, and if you know me, you know I like to get all my games physically. It comes with this really cool box, and inside of it is the standard case, but you also get a physical CD, a sticker sheet, a really cool and thick art book, and also a giant poster inside of the case. This is how you do a really cool physical edition, by the way. And also, this was the same price as the game digitally. This wasn't $10 more or $20 more. For this version of the game, it's the same price as the game on the PlayStation Store, which is just insane. I wish more companies, more studios did this. I absolutely love this. If you include a really cool physical edition of your game, you automatically get bonus points from me. But anyways, that's just my first impressions on Slitterhead. Again, I'm having a hell of a time so far, but consider yourself warned. Your enjoyment of this game will probably vary. Like I said, it's rough around the edges. There are some game design choices that feel dated, but overall, the pros vastly outweigh the cons for me personally. The game is just dripping with soul and personality and originality. The tone of the game is great. The soundtrack is phenomenal. And again, it just feels fresh. This is definitely one of the biggest, if not the biggest, sleeper hits for me this whole entire year. I think it's definitely worth checking out if you're into the more niche horror-centric games. If you're only into the more AAA polished horror games like Resident Evil, Dead Space, and Silent Hill, nothing wrong with that, by the way, but if you're only into those horror games, you probably won't like this game too much, if at all. But if you consider yourself a horror game aficionado, if your love for horror games goes below the surface of things like Resident Evil to the second layer of fandom, where games like Siren and Fatal Frame lie, I think you'll find that Slitterhead deserves a spot on your gaming shelf as well. But just keep in mind, the game is action-focused when it comes to the gameplay, but the story, the world, and the tone is definitely in the realm of horror. But have you played Slitterhead yet? If you have, let me know what you're thinking about it in the comments down below. And if you haven't, let me know. Do you plan on playing this game, or are you going to ignore it completely? Once again, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and thank you for watching, especially if you watched this far.
Who are you?